Hey guys, this is Denny.
And this is James from TeaDB. We're bringing you episode number 52.
Cool.
And today, as you can see, is a special episode.
We have tea basics, so we're going to do green tea for you guys. So, we wanted to bring on a couple different types of green tea to the episode, to TeaDB, and talk about green tea and how to brew green tea, types of green tea, what makes green tea, different signs of green tea in terms of the quality, and then just some general tips on what to expect and how to make it taste really great.
Yeah, that's a lot of green tea for you guys.
Yeah, so why don't we begin with what is green tea, James?
Yep. So green tea is tea that's completely unoxidized, and depending on what country, if it's China, Japan, Korea, you'll get slightly different processing methods, or even tea to tea, perhaps. Like, as you can see, these are both Chinese greens, but the Dragon Well right there looks quite a bit different than your special green right there.
Yeah, that's right. Whereas, for instance, a Japanese green tea is going to be a blend of different different leaves from different farms, whereas this will be from one location, for instance, as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. So as we talked about, I think the differences here, one of the differences in preparation is the difference between sort of, with the green tea, you're going to do a kill green where you basically stop the oxidation process from happening by applying heat. In the Chinese style, you're going to use pan roasting to stop it, and then in Japanese, you use steaming. Is that right?
Yep, exactly. And this, the two Japanese greens we have, one that doesn't look green at all, and one that looks very green. They're both steamed. This one is actually deeply steamed, which is a special type of Sencha processing. Okay. So it's called fuku, which means deeply steamed, I think.
Oh, cool. And this is a hojicha, which is just a roasted.
Yeah, so this is the roasted stems of we'll talk a little bit more about this later on, but the roasted stems of green tea. So Japan and Korea produce 99% green tea, as opposed to China, which produces like 65 or 70% green tea. So China produces a lot of different teas, whereas Japan and Korea really produce just green tea.
And so speaking about green tea production, what's something that makes green tea? So for instance, what's the varietal of tea that's being used?
Yeah, so there's two different tea varietals that are really commonly used, Camellia sinensis and Camellia sinensis assamica. So for green tea, you're going to see a lot of the Camellia sinensis, which is a smaller leaf varietal, and that helps to keep away a lot of the bitterness that people will find unpleasant. And that's also why if you go to Yunnan and you buy some Yunnan green teas, which will be larger leaf varietals, just because that's what grows there, you'll get them very cheaply. And that's why they grow pu'er there, because pu'er is more well-suited towards kind of like that aging and stuff like that, so that bitterness can go away over time.
Interesting. Another thing to note, too, with green tea in terms of the leaves is that they're usually picked young, which means that the leaves themselves will be small in appearance.
Yep.
And while it's important to always get tea that's picked early and that you drink fresh, unless it's been roasted or wanting to be aged, it's especially critical of these teas, which sort of, it sounds strange to say, but are sort of the rawest teas, the least...
Yep.
Ideally, least processed teas in some sense, and therefore the freshest and
you want to consume them as quickly as possible, and that's why there's a thing called pre-Mingqian or something tea, which basically means it came before some specific date in the Chinese lunar calendar, like April 6th, I think is what it was this year.
Huh.
So
cool.
So there's like the pre-Mingqian tea is more expensive than post-Mingqian tea.
Right.
And you'll have things like Sencha for Japan, which is like the harvest that goes straight on the flight to America in our case.
Right, yeah, so the first flush of the first spring harvest is usually the most prized, especially when it comes to green tea. It
can be very expensive.
It can be very expensive, but, you should taste the difference. It's strange for us being in America, in the United States, because the time delay between production and drinking tea is a little bit wacky as compared to being in Asia. So keep that in mind as well, and make sure that when you are ordering green teas that are fresh, make sure that they're fresh and from the year that you're ordering that you 2014.
Definitely. So. And you can do things like refrigerate green tea and stuff like that to preserve it longer. But in general, they are, like Denny said, best consumed fresh and quickly.
And just to piggyback a little bit on this conversation, some of the other green teas that we're not going to talk about, one of them is matcha.
No.
Matcha is basically just Japanese green tea leaves that have been ground into powder and then are consumed by whisking them into the boiling water to produce a very intense blend. I can't remember which episode we did matcha, but one of the earlier ones.
Back, yeah. It's kind of like making a smoothie.
It's sort of like making a frothy smoothie, and it will put hair on your chest or whatever phrase you want to use. It can be very strong. I'd say in that same line of behavior, green tea is often thought of as being less caffeinated, and it can be less caffeinated if you're not brewing it constantly like you would like a pu'er or an oolong. But a couple strong cups of green tea right before bed, not advised necessarily. Some people can handle it. I know I can't. I try to keep green tea early on in my day because it can just get me a little bit too a little bit too jazzed up. Yeah,
depending on where you go and who you talk to, you'll hear different things about like the health of tea and like when you should drink certain teas. Like, for instance, like Japan and Korea, they'll tell you, you drink green tea all the time because that's what they drink. That's all they process there. But then you go to Hong Kong where they drink a ton of ripe pu'er and like older pu'er. They really want that fermentation, which is a lot healthier for the stomach. So. Like, there is no clear consensus for these things, but for me, I tend to agree with Denny. Green tea, especially on an empty stomach, can be pretty stomach ache-inducing.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I strongly would recommend getting a meal first and then having something like this in the morning would be great.
Yep.
Well, why don't we move on to actually brewing up some green tea?
Let's do it.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and actually brew up a Chinese green tea that I received from New Century Tea Shop here in Seattle.
Okay.
I actually don't know much about this tea other than it's a tea from this family's tea farm, and I got a recommendation from our friend Eric Glass to check it out, and it's delicious. It's very good.
And you can see these leaves are real small.
Very small.
Young baby leaves.
That's right. So we are going to go ahead and heat up our gaiwan and teaware. And when it comes to green teas, they often don't brew extensively. So what I mean by that is that you'll get 3 really solid steepings out of them, and then they'll be pretty done. And so usually I think it's worthwhile for folks to buy high quality green tea that you don't need to rinse, because you ultimately would lose a pretty solid steeping of that tea otherwise. So my recommendation would be that folks err on the side of hard quality tea because they're going to get more longevity out of the green tea itself.
Yep, I agree with that. And in general, I find that 2 steeps to 3 or 4 is the maximum I want to drink of green tea anyways.
Absolutely. So, go ahead.
Oh, I was going to ask what brewing parameters are we using for these Chinese greens?
Exactly. So this is 3 grams of leaf, which really doesn't actually feel like a whole bunch. Go ahead and get in there. Sweet.
Corn sweetness.
Yeah, really nice. And we're going to use a kind of roughly 160 Fahrenheit water. I actually don't know what that would be in Celsius. That's what Google's for.
Yep, do the math. This show is for Americans. No, please, it's not at all.
No, it's not.
Yeah. Keep watching us.
And so I will actually let this go ahead and just steep straight out for 30 seconds and start there. And I find that it works really well. It produces a really nice first steeping. The second steeping is usually my sort of prize steeping.
Okay.
And I'll actually brew sometimes for a little bit less time on that because the guy won't be hotter, and the leaves will be a little bit more moist and opened up.
That makes sense.
Yeah. But not anything extravagantly less.
Yep.
And I'm always impressed with the the lightness but strength that the first brew usually has. So, and but with all things like we say on the show, this is up to experimentation. So please do your own tea brewing research.
Yep.
And figure out what works best for you.
Would you say that these are good kind of like general brewing parameters for most Chinese green teas?
I think so. Now you're going to see here that I'm not using a screen. Because the leaf size is so small, you are going to get a little bit of tea leaves in here. It's only really important for folks who are either really, really concerned about presentation, or if you're going to leave the tea sitting, because if you left it sitting, those little leaves would actually still get the tea brewing just a little bit more. So, But since we're going to go ahead and just drink this right away, no big deal. But feel free to use a screen if you like. I just find that it gets in the way for me these days, and just as easy not to. So, I'd say that 3 grams weighed out or even less is a good place to start. Erring on the side of less, I think, for green tea and black tea can be kind of the wiser recommendation. And that you don't have to use boiling water at all. In fact, it can often be rough. Now, I think it'd be really fun to bring some greens onto the show for our labs editions that we always talk about. We should do that someday, and stress test some green teas and see how they taste. But speaking of which, why don't we give this a shot?
Yeah, let's do it.
Cheers. Really vegetal, really strong, full body flavor.
Yeah, very strong body for green tea.
A little bit bitter. I think I actually probably brewed it for just a hair too long. But really full, deep flavors, vegetal, very fresh tasting, I think, is one of the things that I noticed the most. It's almost like stepping outside in the morning and getting your first breath of fresh air. It's very verdant, and of course it's green tea, but I'm always surprised by how alive the tea still tastes.
Absolutely. And green tea is one of the most fragrant teas that you'll usually get.
Absolutely.
So, I mean, that's one of the reasons why it's commonly processed as jasmine tea and scented even more, just because that's kind of like the audience it's appealing to, the people that are really into kind of like the sensory of it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll do one more just on camera here. This could go for probably 3 really good steepings. I'm going to definitely do this for less time. And even just with 3 grams, it's deceptive how little leaf it looks like to start. But we've already filled the guy one halfway up with leaf as it's expanded already. So, and I want to emphasize that you want to try the teas that you get and see how they brew best, and make your decisions that way, for sure. So, yep. But in general, err on the side of less tea. Definitely don't brew this like a wooey or an oolong in general.
Yeah, don't fill your guy one 3/4 up. That would be a very good way to waste a lot of tea in a very nasty brew. So what are some of the different types of famous Chinese green teas?
I'm actually not super well versed with Chinese green tea. Dragon Well is going to be probably the single most famous.
Yep.
Jasmine, as you talked about, is a green tea that's been scented.
Yep. Although you can have jasmine white tea and jasmine anything, really.
True.
You could jasmine scent your ripe pu'er. It'd be weird.
It'd be very strange. I'm not super well versed at all. I'm definitely a neophyte when it comes to Chinese green teas, but I've definitely enjoyed Dragon Well a lot, and Seek It. It ends up being prized and can be difficult to come by good quality Dragon Well. So
definitely.
And we actually have an offering from TeaDB
Yep, that will be brewing up next episode. You guys can see it right there.
So this is a spring 2014 Dragon Well.
Yep, and it's like April 15th, April 14th right now. So.
It looks absolutely gorgeous. It's extremely green and verdant, and especially with Dragon Well, where the pressed leaves tend to lose their color more quickly than other green teas. I'm wildly impressed and really excited to try that. So, yeah.
A little bit more bitterness in this one.
Yeah, interestingly enough, I would even maybe tone down the amount of tea leaves that I use for this, frankly.
Yeah.
Yeah, but still has that full body, still has that sort of heightened awareness. I really
definitely a strong body on this one.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
Probably the most striking thing about this tea for me, at least.
Yeah, there's a nice, wonderful sort of end to this tea, with a little bit of sort of sweetness. I think the corn is definitely correct. Very vegetal. These teas, so green teas, aren't going to taste really nutty. They're not going to taste really fruity, usually. They're not going to taste really mineral-y, usually. They're going to err on the side of sort of grassy notes, vegetal notes, maybe a little bit of sort of crisp crisp sweetness.
Yep, that crisp, sweet freshness is probably the thing I associate most closely with green teas.
So this is great. So maybe we should move on and try some Sencha.
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
Alright guys, so we are going to brew up some Sencha. So we have some Sencha from Ocha, which is an online vendor. This is the Sei Midori, so it's really, really finely ground. Theoretically, we're going to just use a normal teapot here, but theoretically, if I had the resources, I would be using one with a much finer mesh, just because if you look at these leaves, they're so fine. So some of those are going to get through. It's kind of inevitable using a strainer like this. But yeah, let's have a go at it. Well, I'm actually going to preheat teaware as well. Oop, this is a little bit hotter than I'm used to. So we're going to end up letting this sit for a hot second.
Cool.
So I find that Japanese greens, and the reason why we swap spots is Denny has a lot more experience with Chinese greens than myself, and I usually drink Japanese greens instead. I found that Japanese greens are even more sensitive to water temperature and small brewing parameter differences than Chinese greens. So we're going to take a special care to how to do this. So for Japanese greens, they're one of the few tea genres where I'd actually recommend weighing out the exact amount of tea leaves, as well as taking note of like time, temperature, and stuff like that. I have a thermometer over at my normal brewing station where I normally stick it in and see what it gets to. So I recommend usually waiting, this is called a yuzamashi, it's a water cooler, until it gets to about 160 degrees, and then pouring this back into our teapot.
Okay, fantastic. And the reason why this tea is probably not nearly as tolerant of the different changes is just that the leaves themselves are so small that the actual it's almost like a fine dust, frankly, and the ability for the leaves themselves to absorb water and release their oils and all the flavonoids that create the beautiful taste of tea is just going to happen much more quickly. So yeah, this is something where it seems as if you are not being attentive to this tea, it is going to be very, very easy to ruin it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. You do not want to brew your Japanese greens mother style, where you just pour it in and you forget about it for 3... I was about to say 3 weeks, but that's unrealistic. More like 30 minutes. Yeah. And then you come back and like, oh, honey, do you want some tea?
Yeah.
Don't do that. You're going to get a nasty, uber caffeinated brew.
Yeah, absolutely. And so what if you didn't have a scale at home and you didn't have a variable control tea kettle, James, what would just be your general guideline off the cuff here for?
Yep. So I really do believe you need to pay attention to those things. But, there's a lot of different ways to do it. You don't need to have, like, a special little bowl. You could use any old bowl to do this. But just get a feel for, hey, this feels like 160 degrees, this temperature right here.
Right.
This is how much I burn my hand when it's 200 degrees
Right.
versus 190 versus 180.
Right.
So you can get a really, really nice feel for it, creating your own grill system. You don't need to buy all these special devices or whatnot for these types of teas.
And also, I think what I'm hearing you say, too, is sort of in a general sense, just experiment and get a feel for your own measurement system. So it doesn't need to be a thermometer per se. Maybe it's, your finger or whatever it is. And then I think the general guideline, and correct me if I'm wrong on this, James, would be to err on the side of cooler water than one might expect.
Yep, absolutely. And then, just take note of how you're doing the process and change it the next time to be slightly cooler or warmer, depending on what you want, and take note of the difference. And I mean, that's how all real learning happens to some extent. Right. You can learn this stuff by doing. Don't wait until you have all the devices before you start learning.
Totally. So how much leaf are we using to water here?
Yep. So I use about a 1-to-1 ratio of grams to ounces of water.
Okay.
So we're doing about 4 or 5 ounces, and we're doing about 4 or 5 grams.
Okay.
I'd recommend for beginners to kind of start out a little bit lower, maybe at the 0.6 or 0.7 ratio, use a little bit less tea leaves. And then amp it up as you feel more comfortable. The major differences you're going to get are mainly in the body and stuff like that. You're going to just have a much, much more enhanced body. You can also experiment with brewing temperature. Upping the amount of leaf but lowering the brewing temperature is a really common way to just affect the brew of Sencha. And there's no real right or wrong way about these things. You'll just get slightly different brews.
Cool. And how long are we going to want to brew this for? I love your teapot, by the way. It's super cool.
So I like to brew Sencha for a minute to a minute and a half on the first brew.
Wow.
At about 160 degrees.
Right.
And then you'll find that, kind of like you were talking about in the Chinese green, the leaves absorb a lot of that water. So the amount of water we poured in is actually going to be a fair amount less than the water we get out.
That's right.
Which means that for the subsequent brews, you can really just pour the water in and pour it out for the second steep, which is more or less what I do.
Cool. Fantastic.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think we're probably getting to about that time.
And is there any reason why someone should use a teapot like the one that you have? And maybe speak a little bit about the mesh inside.
For a tea like this, the reason would be basically that if you took a look at our teapots, you'll see a lot of little green specks coming around. And that's just because the tea particles are so fine. But, that's a small thing. I really wouldn't worry about that for most beginners. Mm-hmm. If you're, super nerdy into Japanese green tea, go for it. But, I don't even own, one of those super fine mesh filters.
Right. I would say that it can be helpful with green teas to use a brewing vessel that does have mesh built into the actual housing of the liquid container, as opposed to pouring something like this through a screen into a cup. Just because the screen itself, when it's inside of the vessel, keeps it much more organized and clean in here, as opposed to having a screen, let's say, on here with a bunch of tea left over in it. So just for convenience sake, it might be beneficial to have something with the screen on the inside of the
I think that's a good
vessel.
point, yeah.
All right, well, let's enjoy this. Cheers.
Cheers. So, compared to the Chinese greens, the Japanese ones have a very grassy taste.
Yeah.
So this is like a very rich, sweetened, grassy taste, and I'd say it's pretty characteristic of good Japanese greens.
Absolutely. Really nice. Totally agree on the grassy thing. I love that there's this vegetal sweetness that's definitely coming through with this. It's quite nice, almost kind of like the sweetness that comes from tomatoes. Not nearly as acidic, but really tasty, really vegetal, green, And some people are going to get turned off by something like this, actually.
Yeah, I have a lot of friends that don't like Japanese green teas.
It's just a very strong flavor, and I think that green tea is sort of, at least in American culture, synonymous with healthy drinks. All tea is healthy for the most part. Don't add milk to get as many of the antioxidant properties as you can.
Adding milk to this would be disgusting.
It would be weird. It'd be very strange. Yeah, but this isn't for everybody. So definitely, before you go ahead and watch this episode and decide that you're going to order $500 worth of Sencha, go ahead and try a couple different green tea types and see what you like and what tastes good to you. You might find that, hey, you really just like fruity black teas, and there's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
My girlfriend actually took a picture yesterday and sent it to me. It was like a bunch of grass on the ground, and she's Japanese, and she said, looks like Sencha. And it's totally true.
Yeah.
This tea looks and tastes kind of like grass.
Yeah.
But I say that with the highest regards for grass.
I mean, you're kidding, but there's something to be said about tasting the sweetness that comes with sort of a grassy flavor. And it's not like we don't use grasses in our cooking, like bamboo is technically a grass, and lemongrass is definitely a grass. I mean, so it's interesting that tea can expose us to a variety of different tastes that we don't really realize that we've incorporated in our cooking or cuisines already in that regard, which is really lovely. So, but yeah, it can be an acquired taste for sure. And I don't know if we're going to end up brewing the hojicha or not, but how would the hojicha differ in taste and flavor to something like this?
Yeah, so the hojicha for the Japanese is a much more casual tea.
Okay.
I use it in the same teapot as this, so
Okay.
no need to get special hojicha equipment or anything like that.
Right.
But it's a casual tea, so it stems, so it has a lot less caffeine. The roast takes a lot more caffeine away, so the Japanese drink it at night. Oftentimes they'll just straight up boil it. Because of the roast, it's a lot harder to get it to go bitter. Mm-hmm. So you can brew that a lot of different ways. But usually you'll get kind of like this woody, caramelized sweetness out of it. Mm-hmm. A very basic taste that's very pleasant at certain times, but It's not the most challenging tea, but it's a cool one to explore. And for me, it's really easy drinking.
Yeah, really nice, great iced, great any time of the day. Yeah, totally enjoy it. And excited to show the footage of the brewing vessel here because the leaves are so beautiful. Just floating in here, it's just can be mesmerizing here. So now, wow, look at how green that is. It's incredible, especially with Senchas. The greenness of green tea really shines with Sencha, I think. The color of this is just forest green. It's incredible.
Yep, and there's actually a couple other different types of Japanese greens. Denny was talking about matcha earlier, which is one of like the characteristic Japanese greens. Mm-hmm. But there's also a tea called Gyokuro, which is another green tea that's grown under the shade. And so similar to matcha, it can be very, very expensive and premium. And that one you'll actually brew at much lower temperatures. But because that's kind of like more of an expert level tea, we're not really going to dive into that for this green tea episode. In fact, I would say for most people that are just starting out with green teas or tea in general, to start out with more casual teas like Sencha, some of the banchas like hojicha.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think that we'll call that there for this episode on getting acquainted with green teas. If you guys liked this, please give us a comment below and let us know. Let us know about things that we can do differently, things to add, things to take away. We're still learning, and we take all of your feedback very seriously, and we love all of it.
Absolutely.
And please get out there and drink some Chinese green teas and some Japanese green teas. Try them. Let us know what you like. Send us some. Hey, we love it. We'll be bringing on this Dragon Well in the next episode, I believe. Yep. Excited for that. And if someone wanted to learn more about
tea,
mostly high mountain Taiwanese oolong tea, but about tea in general, what should they do, James?
Yeah, they should come visit TeaDB.org. We have a lot of episodes, a lot on Taiwanese oolongs and Wui oolongs. Tends to be more of what we drink on a daily basis, but we have some other episodes on like Korean green teas, Japanese green teas. So yeah, go ahead to TeaDB.org and check us out.
Cool. We'll see you guys next time. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks for watching.